Hi, I'm Lee, and this is Adventure Knitting, and it's a collection of knitting patterns which are all mix and match with different options that you get to choose from. And you can choose to make a hat or cowl or fingerless mitts or a coffee cup sleeve. And then there's 20 different stitch patterns. There's 3 different sections that you knit, and all the sections have a bunch of different options. And all the items can be made in any weight yarn, more or less, depending on the item. It might work better and heavier or better and lighter. But you pick your yarn, you pick how many colors you want to use, you pick your item, and you pick all your different options as you go. And some of the sections use one color, some of the sections use multiple colors. You can bust through your leftover scraps if you want. You pick all the different elements of everything, and you custom size it as you go. All the items are knit modularly with short row shaping and sizing, so you size it as you go. You don't have to do a gauge swatch. There's no picked up stitches. There's little to no seaming depending on what options you choose. It's all custom sized, like fit to you, fit to your head or your wrist or your neck or whatever as you go. And it's all just knit magically together in one piece. So the Adventure Knitting book, you may find it in your local yarn store in actual paperback book form, but if you get the PDF online, then you can print out the pages as booklets that fold into these little booklets, and you bind it all together. I'm going to show you exactly how to do all that. It's really simple. You're just going to need to print it out on paper. You need some scissors and some paper folding and then a sewing needle and thread, and bind it together. If you can knit, you can totally do the book binding, no problem. And then there's this optional cover too, which you can print out on regular paper or on cardstock if you want to be more of a hardback cover. There's 2 booklets which are just the charts and nothing else, so you can choose do you like charts or do you hate charts, and you can skip those. So depending on that, it's either 8 pieces of paper to make 8 little booklets, or 10 if you do the charts. So that's all you need is 8 pieces of paper, 10 pieces of paper to make a whole either 64-page or 80-page book. If you don't want to make the book, totally fine. The PDF also comes with an ebook format you can read on your computer screen or your tablet, or you can print it out if you want. It's going to be kind of a lot of pages because it's like 100 different patterns worth of stuff all mixed and matched together. So, but if you don't want to fold it, there's that too, so any format you want, it's all there. The PDF also shows you a bunch of samples, but you can also get online and go to the Ravelry projects and look at everyone else's samples, and they'll all be unique and different, and you can get ideas for what kind of yarn you might want to use based on that, or just go to your local yarn shop and see what looks fun. And so any format you want, you can go on your Adventure Knitting Day in the Woods adventure, and if you do want to make this book, then watch on and I'll show you how. Alright, it's time to make your Adventure Knitting book. Now all you need is your pages printed out and scissors, and when you're printing out you want to make sure nothing gets cut off. So depending on your printer settings, your paper size and everything, that might mean different things for you, but basically just make sure you have it fit to page, or shrink down the percentage of the size that you're printing, or whatever you need to do so nothing gets cut off. It's okay if there's extra white space. This was designed for US letter size 8.5 by 11 inches, so if you're in Europe or you're using a different size, that's fine. You just want to make sure nothing gets cut off, and then you'll have the extra white space to trim off as you're making your book. So the first thing you're going to do to make your booklet is fold your page in half lengthwise. Now if it did print centered and you're using the same paper size as me, the letter size, then you should be able to just line up your corners and just fold it exactly lengthwise, and it should be on this line in the center here. If you're using a different size, what you want to do is just actually fold it on that line, and then you'll have extra white space up here that you'll just trim off with your scissors. So do whatever you need to do to fold it in half lengthwise on that line. And it's okay if it's a little bit off the line, you know, if it's like a millimeter or 2 off that line, it's fine. But you want it to be as close as possible. If you have it folded on that line and the edges line up, then you're done. If the edges don't line up and you have extra white space sticking out on one of the edges, then just trim it with your scissors to make it so that those edges line up. Now you want to do the same thing widthwise. Oh, and right now don't crease these folds really hard. Just fold them just like with your fingers once, and you're going to crease everything at the end, so leave it a little bit loose for now. So when you fold it widthwise, it should land right on that little notch which is centered. So if you look and it's not centered on your page, then what you want to do is just fold it on that notch. So you can just kind of crease it with your finger on the notch and then make sure the edges are lined up so it's straight. Just look at the edges, fold that. And now the final folds, you're going to fold each side into the center like this. So these folds should land right at the ends of the long line. So if you use a different paper size or you had to shrink it down, just crease right where that line ends right there and fold it up right there. And if that goes past the center, if you have extra white space over here, goes up past it, just trim that off with your scissors. Okay, so make those folds on both sides to the end of the lines up to the centers. Trim off any extra white space you have up here so that when you open it up like this, these should just meet and touch in the middle. And I did it kind of quickly, but they should touch right in the middle and not overlap at all. So when you open it up, you have these folds dividing the page into 8 equal booklet rectangles. And all of them should be equal size to each other, right down the center, and then quarters, and then the center again. So once all your white space is trimmed off, that's what it should look like. Now you're just going to make one cut. So fold it again, the widthwise fold, nice and straight. Everything is lined up. Hold that together. You're going to want to pinch it with 2 fingers with one hand here to make sure it doesn't come unaligned or anything. And then use your scissors to cut on the line. If your fold mark is a little bit to the side of the line, cut it more where your fold is because you want it to fold evenly. So cut either on the line exactly or on the fold exactly. It should be basically the same place. Snip. Right up to the end of the line, to that crease line right there. Now, it's going to look like this. Now what you want to do, find the cover page of whatever booklet you're doing. That's in front. Push it all together and turn it into a book. And now you're going to crease it all into a nice neat book. Now the way I found to make it the neatest is to start with the last page, which has the open papers here. Kind of pinch those corners together so that's all nice and neat. And then grab the second to last page and then the second page and kind of line them all up starting at the end. Leave the first page open because the first page is like this. You can kind of adjust the crease to make it as neat as possible. And it's hard to explain. When you're actually doing it, it'll make more sense. So you have all these nice and neat lined up with each other. Pinch them, hold them down with your fingers, and then grab the cover and just kind of pull it and flatten it down onto your tabletop. And that'll make kind of the nicest, neatest book. And then crease it, and you'll kind of adjust the crease from the original fold mark there. And then crease the center and the top. Alright, so now you have your nice, neat booklet, which should work no matter what paper size you have, no matter what country you're in. You should be able to make that work with just a little bit of trimming. And you're going to have all those separate booklets, and then the next step you're going to do is bind them all together into a book. Ta-da! So to bind your book, here's an already bound book. These are all the materials you're going to need. You're going to need your 8 folded booklets that have been folded and are ready to go. You're going to need scissors, a pencil, a needle. I like to use an embroidery needle. It's a good size for the binding, so I recommend embroidery needle, but whatever kind of sewing needle you want to use is fine. And a good sturdy thread that's not going to break. So pull it with your hand to make sure it doesn't break easily first. If it's like 100% cotton thread, then it might break too easily and you don't want your book to fall apart, so make sure that's not going to happen. And you just need one thread, but you can optionally do the last step in a contrasting thread to be more decorative, which is what I did here. So you can kind of see how it's done first in the orange and then the final step is wrapped around in the green. So you could use just a regular sewing thread for the main binding, and then you could use like an embroidery thread or like a lace weight yarn for that final step to be more decorative on the outside of the spine. The way that I do my length of my thread is I hold one end and then I unspool it with the other hand, and I hold my hands apart as far as they'll go, all the way stretched out to my sides, and then I do that length plus like another 2 feet or so, just like another chunk on top of that, and that is a pretty good length. One other material that you might need, depending on the options that you choose, is one more blank sheet of paper. And what that's for is if you choose to add the cover at the end, which I'll talk about at the end, the way the book goes into the cover is there's these pockets that the first and last page slip into. Now this one I'm showing you right here, I have the first page of the book slipped into the cover, which means that you can't read the first page. You have to pull it out in order to read it, which you can do, but you can make that choice to just slip the first page in, and that's fine. But if you want, you can make an extra blank page to put at the front and the back of the book to slip into the pocket, so that way you're not covering up any pages in the cover pocket. So if you want to do that, all you do is take your blank sheet of paper, make the same kind of folds that you made when you folded your booklets. So fold lengthwise in half, fold widthwise in half, and then fold up to the centers. This is just like when you made your booklets, but just with no lines on here. And you can trim, if you cut off excess white space when you made your booklets, then you can do that at the end here. So just fold it into eighths, have your eighths. And now what you do is fold it back on the lengthwise line and then cut it in half all the way through to make 2 separate sheets. So you make those folds and you cut that in half, and then you have these 2 little half booklets. They're just like one single inner page. And now the one final step, if you trimmed off excess white space when you made your booklets, you're going to want to trim it so they're the same size now. So now you have these 2 extra little booklets, and a side note, if you decided you wanted the charts, the last chart booklet actually has a blank page at the end. So you can skip adding the blank page at the back and only add it to the front if you want. That's your choice too. So once you have your 8 books folded and ready to be bound, get the spines all in a flat line, straight together, tops and bottoms aligned, like that. And then take your pencil and mark, I don't use a ruler or anything, just kind of eyeball it, like about 3/4 of an inch in from each side. So you're going to take your needle and poke holes through the spine at the marks that you made 3 times per hole into all 3 of the pages, all 3 of the openings. So you just poke through, you're going through both layers there. And now when you go to the next page, it'll be that same spine hole, and then you'll be poking a new hole through the middle. That's 1, 2, 3, and right there. 1, 2, 3. Alright, so you have all those holes poked, and your spine looks like that with all the holes. All the insides have holes, and ready to start binding. So get your needle threaded. So you're going to start by going out the top hole of the center page of the first book. So that first book, middle, open in the middle, which is page 4 or 5. Go out the top hole, out the spine. And then you're going to leave just a little bit of thread, which will be enough to tie it off at the end. Just leave about 3 inches or so. And just make sure you don't accidentally pull that through. And now you're going to start binding it to the second book. Grab the second book, pull it together, open it to the first page. Now you're always going to go in whatever hole you just came out of. So your thread is never going to go down, up and down the spine. It'll always just go across the same hole. So I open it up to the first page, and I go in the top hole. Just jump right over and thread it through. Now make sure you're holding on to the book where the end of the thread is so you don't accidentally pull the end of the thread through. I have a lot of yardage to pull through at the beginning, and then as you go it'll get less and less, of course. And then you go out the bottom. So you're always going to go in one hole, out the other hole, every time you go into a page. Out the bottom hole. And now you're going to flip over to the last page of the first book and go in the bottom hole. And out the top hole. Always in one hole, out the other hole. At the end you'll be able to tighten it tighter together, but you still want to just kind of, don't pull too hard, because if you pull too hard you'll rip the paper. I've done that too. So just pull it so it's snug, and that's all. Okay, so next up, I just came out the top hole of the last page of the first book. Now I'm going to go in the center of the second book, because I already have bound. Every book you're going to go in order. You're going to do first page, second page, last page for each book. So I can see where I want to go next by seeing that I already have thread in the first page, and I don't have thread yet in the center page. So go on the center page, in the top, out the bottom. Alright, so I just came out the center of the second book. Now I'm going to add the third book, because the first book, the first book I skipped the first page because we'll do that at the end. But I started with the center, and then I did the last page. Now I'm doing the second book. I did the first and the center page. Now I'm going to add the third book. So I'm establishing the pattern. The pattern is always going to stay the same for the pages. When you come out the center page of a book, your next step will always be to add the next book and do the first page of the next newly added book. So I'm adding the newly added third book, and I'm going in the first page. In one hole, out the other hole. And then after you add your newly added book and go on the first page, the next step is go in the last page of the previous book. So I already did the center page, now I'm doing the last page. So you add a new book, go on the first page, then you go on the last page of the previous book, always. So I just came out the bottom hole of the last page of the second book. After you come out any last page, the next step is to always go in to the center page of the next book, because you already did the first page of the next book. Now you do the center page of the next book. And after you do the center page of any book, the next step is always to add a new book and do the first page of the new book. Just repeating those same steps to go through every book. Right now I'm adding the fourth book. First page of the new book. Followed by last page of the previous book. Last page of the previous book. Center page of the next book. And if you have a hard time remembering the order, this is all in written form in the Adventure Knitting PDF. So you can always refer to that too. As long as you remember that you're always going in order, first, center, last, with every book, then you can always see, I already did the first and the center, so then the next one here will be the last, but first After going out the center of the one, add the next one, because you can always check to see. I finished the last page of the previous book, which means there's no more to do with the previous book, so I add the next book. You're always going from one book to another book and back and forth. You're never going out one hole of one book and into the same book. That wouldn't be binding anything together, so you're always going from one book to the next, to the previous, to the next, to the newly added, back and forth between all the books. So first page of the next newly added book. Okay, so when you add that final book, you'll do the first few steps as usual. Come out the center, and you finish the second to last book. You've gone through the first page and the middle page, the center page of the last book. And now the next step would be to add another book, but we're all out of books. And now here is where I interrupt myself to show you if you're going to add those extra blank books to go into the cover pockets. So I have all 10 here bound together, including the charts. Alright, so if you want to add that new extra booklet, you're just going to grab that like it's a new book. You're going to go into the bottom as if it was a new book, but it just has the one page. In the bottom out the top. And then you just go back over to the same page you came from, the center page of the last book. So go back through that same hole in the center, and then back out the bottom. So you're going over the thread that was already there from before in the center of the last book. So now you have this extra little mini booklet on the end there. And now you're back where you started for the next step. Remember how at the beginning we started with the center page of the first book, which means the first page of the first book hasn't been bound yet. So now we're going to go across all the books to the other side, to the first page of the first book. Now this is where you want to kind of pinch them together. You don't want it to be like completely tight, like pushed together tight, but you do want to just kind of tighten it up. If it was, like, see how it's kind of loose and floppy here? You don't want it to be so loose and floppy. Alright, go through the first page of the first book, in one hole, out the other, the usual. But pinch it with your fingers there while you pull up here. And then once it's out the hole, you can hold the whole thing together. But now you're going to go back across to the last page of the last book. So open that up, keep it pinched together, and go in that last hole of the last book. In the top, out the bottom. Pinch tight, tight but not too tight. And now you're going to end by going in the center of the first book, which is where you started. That's where your end is. So open that up. So your end is right here from the beginning. Make sure it doesn't loosen up here. Don't pull too tight and rip it. Go in the center. So both thread ends are both in the middle of the first book. So now, with it all pinched and pulled tightly, I'm going to tie them together to keep everything nice and tightly bound. And what you want to do is tie them right on top of one of the holes, because that way you can weave the ends of the thread inside the middle of the book where they'll be invisible. Okay, now to add that blank book to the front, you're going to do that now. You do want to finish and tie, like I said to do, so that it stays tightly together, because if you don't tie it, then it might loosen up with this next step. So take that thread that's attached to the knot and go back out the bottom hole, and then into the bottom hole of the blank book, out the top hole of the new blank booklet, and then in center of the first booklet, back where you just came from. Same page. Back to where your original thread end is. So now you have a choice. If you want to use the same thread that you've been using for the next step, which is going to be going back over the spine, then what you want to do is one last step. You want to go back out this booklet and then back into the blank one again, so that way you start the next step with the blank one with the same thread. Now, if you want to use a different thread, a different color, or a thicker yarn for the next step, then just tie this back to the original end, and then you want to start the next step from the blank book. So in the next step, when I say to go from the first to the last book, now it's going to be the first book is the blank book and the last book is the blank book. If you want to do your final step, which is going over the spine binding and neatening it all up, if you want to do that with your same thread that you've been using and you have enough length left, then you can leave that attached and threaded and do that right now without breaking the thread. I'm going to do that with a different color yarn just so you can kind of see what's happening a little better and to be more decorative about it, just for fun. So what I'm going to do right now is cut both threads, snip, and now I'm going to thread both of these ends onto the same needle. I'm going to bring this needle in the hole, but only the first layer of the hole, not all the way out to the spine, just into the inside of the book, of the booklet. Because of the way it's folded, I can hide the thread in there. So I'm going to bring it in that hole kind of at an angle, so it's going inside there. And then just reach in there and pull it through. Just kind of pull that, and now it's hidden. Now there's that little knot, but there's no end. Either take your new thread or the still attached thread that's coming out right here and go down either hole, doesn't matter. Leave a couple inches there enough to tie at the end. And now you're going to go across from the first book to the last book. You're going to wrap the thread around the binding thread in between every booklet. So you bring your needle through between the booklets. You're not going through any holes of paper, you're not breaking the paper, you're just going in between the booklets. You're going to do that through in between every booklet. So you're going to open the next booklet. Again, go in the middle, out the bottom. You can go in either direction, but you need to always go in the same direction. I'm just going to keep repeating that all the way across. So I just finished going across from the first booklet to the last booklet, wrapping around in between every booklet in the middle. Okay, so now that I've gone across, I'm going to go through the center page of the last booklet, through the spine, just like in the binding steps. In the bottom hole, out the top hole. And I'm going to do the same thing back across the other side. So just go open the last booklet, that, through in between the two booklets, up to the top. Open the next booklet, in between the booklets, up to the top. Wrap it around and around. Just keep doing that back over to the first one. Now I've gone back across from the last book back over to the first book on the top holes. Pull snug and thread that needle to where the end is, which is in the center of the first book. Go through, and there's the other end. You're just going to pull both of them nice and snug and do the same thing I showed you before. Tie a knot right at one of the holes. It's all twisted together all nice so it's not floppy. And if I move the books around, it all stays in place. Okay, so that can be it, and that can be your book. Or you can add the optional cover if you want to. That's up to you. Now here it is all covered with that blank page in the front, so you're not losing any pages in the front there. And in the back, and the whole book. And because of the way that it's bound and the way that the pages slip into the pocket so it's not stuck in the cover, everything is gonna pop open and lay flat on the tabletop to any page. So, perfect type of binding for a knitting book. So for this one, I'm gonna do it with 4 holes. So I'm doing all the steps with the bottom and then all the steps again with the top. And I'll do this off camera because it'll be the exact same steps that you already saw, but I'm just going to show you marking the holes and getting started. I'm going to do like a 1/2 inch in from each side and then kind of equal distance in the middle there for the 4 separate holes. So now I'm just going to do all the same steps. I'm going to make all my pinholes through all the pages, the same as I already did, but with all 4 holes. And then I'm just going to do all the steps between these 2, and then all the steps between these 2. So it's not really much more secure than 2 holes because it's such a small book, but it has a nice look to it. And if you want it to look a little bit nicer, just different, and you don't mind the extra steps, do 4 holes, or you can do 3 holes. If you do 3 holes, 1 in the center, 2 in the outside, it's exactly the same as 4 holes except that you're using the center with both steps. So you're doing all the steps once with the bottom and the center as the top and bottom, and you're doing all the steps again with the center and the top as the bottom and top. So it's the same as the 4, except these 2 would just be 1. And then what you see on the inside, instead of the 2 pieces of thread, would be they would be touching in the middle using the same hole. So that's another option if you want to do that. All the same steps, just different looks. So there's the binding.